There was a photograph on my wife's study wall for 31 years. Copacabana Beach, 1973. A postcard she had bought somewhere in her 20s and framed and hung in every study she ever had. In our first apartment in Atlanta, in the house we moved to in 1991, in the smaller room she converted to a study after our children left. Same photograph, same frame, same position on the wall, no matter what else changed around it. A black and white image of the promenade, the mosaic sidewalk, the ocean, the shape of the mountains in the distance. Beautiful in the specific way that a place is beautiful when you've never been there and have decided, without proof, that it is somewhere that would matter to you. She always said, "One day, Thomas, one day we'll go." We never went, and then she died. And I came here alone to finally see the thing she had looked at for 31 years. And I met Gabriela, and I spent $390,000 over 2 years trying to hold on to something that was never, in the way I needed it to be, mine to hold. My name is Thomas Harrington. I am 69 years old. For 32 years, I was a federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is important context for what I am about to tell you. I spent 32 years on the federal bench deciding the fates of other people, reading testimony, weighing evidence, assessing credibility, determining with what I believed was considerable precision when a person was telling the truth and when they were not. I was, by any professional measure, good at it. My reversal rate on appeal was among the lowest in the district for the last 15 years of my tenure. Attorneys who appeared in my courtroom described me, I know this because these things get back to you, as careful, thorough, and difficult to deceive. I am telling you this so that when I tell you what happened with Gabriela, you understand that it was not a failure of intelligence. It was not a failure of judgment in any professional sense. It was something else. Something that 32 years of federal jurisprudence does not prepare you for and cannot protect you from. It was loneliness. The specific total loneliness of a man who has lost the person who made sense of everything. Her name was Margaret. We met in 1981 at a law school dinner in Atlanta. She was a third-year student. I was a young associate at a firm downtown, both of us at the same event for reasons neither of us fully remembered afterward. She was the kind of person who listened before she spoke, which in a room full of lawyers made her immediately distinctive. She had the quality, I have spent a long time trying to describe this accurately, she had the quality of making you feel that whatever you were saying was receiving her full attention, and that her full attention was something worth having. We were married in 1983. We had 2 children, our son James, who practices corporate law in Charlotte, and our daughter Claire, who is a pediatrician in Boston. We built a life in Buckhead over 37 years that was, in the ways that matter, very good. We had our difficulties, as every long marriage does. The years when the children were young and exhausting, the period in our late 40s when we were both so deep in our respective careers that we would go entire weeks without a real conversation. But we came through those periods. We knew how to come through them together, which is a skill that most people don't develop until they've had enough practice to need it. Margaret became a federal public defender. She spent her career defending people the system had largely decided were not worth defending. She was methodical, relentless, and possessed of a moral clarity about her work that I found, across 37 years of marriage, consistently impressive and occasionally humbling. We argued about cases sometimes, not specific cases that would have been improper, but about principles, about the weight of evidence, about what justice actually meant in practice. Those arguments were among the best conversations of my life. She had the photograph of Copacabana on her study wall the entire time. I asked her about it once, early in our marriage, what it meant to her specifically, why that image and not something else. She said, "I don't know entirely, but when I look at it, I feel like there's still somewhere left to go, like the story isn't finished." We planned to go when I retired, when she retired, when the children were settled, when the timing was right. The timing was never quite right. And then she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the fall of 2020, and the timing became irrelevant. She died in March 2021. She was 67 years old. She died at home, in the study with the photograph on the wall, on a Sunday morning when the light was very clear. I retired from the bench in December 2021, 9 months after her death, which is both a short time and a very long time, depending on how you measure it. The retirement had been planned for 2 years before that. It simply arrived in a different context than I had anticipated. I had imagined retirement as a beginning. It arrived as an extension of an ending. I sold the house in Buckhead in March 2022, exactly 1 year after Margaret died. I did not sell it because I needed to, or because anyone suggested it. I sold it because I could not find the right relationship to a house that had been built around a life that no longer existed. Every room had a different version of her in it, and I found I could not stop seeing those versions, which was both a comfort and a form of torment that I did not want to live inside indefinitely. After the sale and the retirement accounts and the investment accounts and the insurance policy Margaret had maintained for 20 years, with the specific foresight of someone who understood risk from a lifetime of defending people who hadn't, I had $390,000. I was 67 years old. I had no plan. And I had a photograph of Copacabana that I had taken from the wall of Margaret's study before the house was sold, and that was sitting, rolled in a cardboard tube, in the storage unit I had rented for the things I wasn't ready to decide about. I took it out of the storage unit the day I booked the flight. I booked a one-way ticket to Rio de Janeiro in April 2022. Not a round trip. This decision was deliberate. I had spent 32 years as a federal judge making decisions with both exits clearly marked, and I was tired of marked exits. I wanted to arrive somewhere without a departure already built into the ticket. James, when I told him, asked 3 questions in rapid succession. Did I have health insurance sorted? Did I have a lawyer who spoke Portuguese? And had I told Claire? I told him I had answered the first 2 questions and that he should tell Claire himself, which he did, and she called me 40 minutes later with the specific alarmed competence of a pediatrician encountering a situation that requires immediate assessment. She said, "Dad, Rio." I said, "Your mother had that photograph on her wall for 31 years. There was a pause. Then she said, "Okay. Okay, Dad." She understood. Margaret had been her mother for 37 years, and Claire had looked at that photograph every time she sat in that study, and I think she understood, without needing it spelled out, what I was doing and why. I arrived in Rio de Janeiro on a Wednesday evening in May 2022. The taxi from the airport came through the tunnel, and then the city appeared, not gradually, the way cities usually reveal themselves, but all at once, emerging from the tunnel into a scale and density and light that I was not prepared for, even having looked at photographs and videos and a postcard for 31 years. The real thing was different from the image in the way that all real things are different from their representations. More present, more insistent, more impossible to organize into a manageable impression. I checked into a hotel in Copacabana. I walked to the promenade that evening after dinner, and I stood on the mosaic sidewalk with the ocean behind me and looked at the shape of the mountains in the distance, the same mountains from the photograph. And I took out my phone and took a picture, and I sent it to Claire with no words, just the image. She sent back a single word, Mom. I stood there for a long time. The city went about its business around me. The joggers, the vendors, the couples on the benches, the particular unremarkable ongoing life of a city that is not performing for anyone, but simply existing with the confidence of a place that has been here for 5 centuries and expects to continue. I was 67 years old, and I was standing in the place that Margaret had looked at from her study wall for 31 years and had never reached. I thought, I'm here. I'm here for both of us. I found the apartment in Ipanema 2 weeks later. 7th floor, southwest-facing balcony, a view that included the beach and, on clear days, the Dua Irmão peaks in the distance. The building was maintained by a doorman named Gilberto, who had been there for 19 years and who regarded the building with the particular proprietary care that I recognized, having spent 32 years on the bench, as the attitude of a person who takes their responsibilities seriously and does not expect to be thanked for it. I respected him immediately. I enrolled in Portuguese classes at a language school in Ipanema. I found a bakery near the apartment where the bread was extraordinary and where the woman behind the counter corrected my Portuguese with the patient, slightly resigned expression of someone who has been correcting the same mistakes for a very long time. I walked the city every afternoon, the neighborhoods I had read about, the neighborhoods I stumbled into, the neighborhoods that had no particular reason to be interesting, and were anyway. I sat on the balcony in the late afternoons and watched the light do what the light in Rio does, which is turn everything it touches a specific shade of gold that exists, as far as I have been able to determine, nowhere else. I was not happy exactly. I was something adjacent to happy, present, engaged, occupied. I was, for the first time in 14 months, not primarily a man who was grieving. I was a man who was somewhere, doing something, noticing things. That was enough. For those first months, that was genuinely enough. I met Gabriela on a Thursday evening in August 2022, 3 months after I arrived. I was at a wine bar in Ipanema, a small place near the apartment that I had begun going to on Thursday evenings, because Thursday evenings had become, for reasons I could not entirely articulate, the hardest evening of the week. There was a group of 8 or 10 people at the table behind mine. The specific animated Thursday evening energy of people who work together and are in the portion of the evening that feels like a reward. I was reading and half listening and having my second glass when a woman from the group touched my arm and apologized for her colleague who had jostled my table while going past. I said it was fine. She said, "You're American." I said yes. She said, "What are you reading?" I said, "A Brazilian History," poorly translated. She looked at the cover, then back at me, with an expression that I would come to understand was characteristic of her. A quick, comprehensive assessment, followed by a decision about whether the thing being assessed was worth her time. The assessment took perhaps 3 seconds. She said, "I can recommend a better one, if you'll buy me a glass of wine. I was a federal judge for 32 years. I have, in that time, heard a great many people say a great many things and have developed what I believe is a fairly reliable ability to understand what is actually being communicated beneath the surface of what is being said." What Gabriela said to me in that moment was, I find you interesting, and I would like to see if you find me interesting, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I found her interesting. I bought her the wine. She was 29 years old. She told me this in the first 10 minutes, directly, in the way she told me everything, without the obliqueness that people use when they think the information might create a problem. She was from Belo Horizonte, had been in Rio for 7 years, worked as a buyer for a clothing import company. She had been in a relationship for 3 years that had ended 8 months earlier. She described it in one sentence with the efficiency of someone who has processed the thing and moved on from it. She had a younger brother who was in university, a mother who ran a small sewing business in Belo Horizonte, a father she did not mention and whom I did not ask about. She asked about me with the specific curiosity of someone who has identified a thing that interests them and wants to understand it properly. She asked what kind of law I had practiced. I told her I had been a federal judge. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's a lonely job." I said, "Why do you say that?" She said, "Because you spend your whole life deciding things for other people, and you have to be careful who you get close to, and eventually you retire, and you've been careful for so long you don't know how to stop." I looked at her across the small table in the wine bar and thought, she is 29 years old, and she has just described my entire adult life in 4 sentences. I said, "That's fairly accurate." She said, "So what are you doing in Rio?" I told her about the photograph, about Margaret, about the 31 years it had spent on the wall of the study, about arriving at Copacabana and sending Claire the picture and the single word Claire had sent back. Gabriela listened to all of it. Then she said, "So you came here for her?" I said, "Partly. And partly because I didn't know where else to go." She nodded slowly. Not the nod of someone performing understanding, but the nod of someone who has actually understood something and is acknowledging it. Then she picked up her wine and said, "I think Rio is a good choice for that." We talked until the bar closed. I walked home through the neighborhood at midnight and stood on the balcony for a long time, looking at the city below, and thought about what she had said about the loneliness of my profession, and about how strange it was to be understood, quickly and accurately, by a stranger in a wine bar in a city I had moved to 3 months earlier. I am a federal judge. Or I was. I know what evidence is. I know the difference between what a fact proves and what it suggests. What that evening suggested was, this person sees something in you that is true. What it proved was, you had an interesting conversation. I chose to act on the suggestion and set aside the proof. That decision cost me $390,000, and I am still not entirely certain it was wrong. We saw each other twice more in August, both times for dinner, both times with the quality of 2 people who have agreed, without saying so, that something is developing, and who are in the specific pleasure of the period before it has to be defined. In September, she came to the apartment for the first time. In October, she was there most evenings. In November, I asked her to move in. She said yes without hesitation, but she said it in a way that I had to decide how to interpret. The yes of someone who genuinely wants the thing, or the yes of someone who has been hoping to be asked and is pleased that the timing has worked out. I was a federal judge. I was trained to make exactly this kind of distinction. I decided I didn't want to make it. Not about her. Not yet. She moved in on the 1st of December 2022 with 4 large suitcases, a collection of plants that she knew by name, and arranged on the balcony with the specific authority of someone who understands living things, and a photograph of her own. Her mother in front of a small house in Belo Horizonte, taken years ago, which she put on the bookshelf near the window. I hung Margaret's photograph of Copacabana on the wall of the study. The room now had both photographs in it. I thought about what that meant for a while, and then I decided not to think about it, which is either wisdom or avoidance, and I have never been entirely sure which. The apartment was, with Gabriela in it, a different place. That is not nothing. I want to be clear about that. A 67-year-old man who has spent the previous 14 months in the particular hollowness of a life that has lost its organizing principle. When that man comes home to a place where someone is present, where there is noise and light and the smell of something cooking and a person who looks up when you come through the door, something in him that has been closed begins, cautiously, to open. That opening was real. It cost me everything I had left, but it was real. I want to tell you something that almost nobody tells you in stories like this one. I knew. Not everything, and not from the beginning. But I knew the essential shape of it by the third month. I knew that what I was to Gabriela, at 29, ambitious, beautiful, in a city full of options, was not what she was to me. I knew that the arrangement had an economics to it that my presence made possible. I knew that a retired American judge on the 7th floor of a building in Ipanema with a southwest-facing balcony and a pension and $390,000 in savings was a different proposition than a 30-year-old Brazilian man in a shared apartment in Leblon. I am not telling you this to diminish what we had. I am telling you this because I believe that the truth, told accurately, is more interesting and more useful than the version where the older man is deceived and the younger woman is the villain. That version is simpler. It is also incomplete. The more complete version is this. I was a 67-year-old widower who had spent 32 years being careful, who had arrived in a city where nobody knew him and nobody needed anything from him, and who had found, in a wine bar on a Thursday evening, a 29-year-old woman who made him feel, for the first time in 2 years, like a person whose presence in a room mattered to someone. I understood the cost. I chose to pay it. The spending began in January 2023, the second month she was living in the apartment. Her mother's medical bills came up in conversation, not as a request, but as a weight she was carrying, mentioned in passing in the way that people mention the things they've decided not to ask for help with. I paid them without being asked. 32,000 reais, at the exchange rate that month, approximately $6,000. The look on her face when I told her was worth more to me than any amount I could put in a savings account. In March, her company restructured and eliminated her position. She was unemployed for 4 months. During those 4 months, I covered everything: her phone, her transportation, the clothing that was, for someone in fashion, both a professional requirement and a genuine love. I covered her share of the groceries, the dinners, the weekend trips within Brazil that she planned and that I funded without her asking. She contributed what she could, which was the presence I mentioned, the apartment being a different place, the door she looked up from when I came home. I thought at the time that this was a reasonable exchange. I think it was a reasonable exchange. I just think I misunderstood the duration. She found a new position in July. Lower salary, smaller company. She began paying her phone bill. I continued to pay everything else, partly because the amounts had never required much thought, and partly because the alternative, recalibrating, introducing a new economy into the apartment, felt like a conversation that would change the nature of what we had, and I did not want to change the nature of what we had. This is what I mean when I say I chose it. Every month I could have had a different conversation. Every month I chose not to. I had been a federal judge. I understood how to have difficult conversations. I had been having them professionally for 32 years. I chose not to have this one because I was afraid of what it would clarify. The trips were my idea, not hers. I want to be accurate about this. She never asked to go anywhere. I planned them, I proposed them, I made the reservations. Buenos Aires in the winter of 2023. Lisbon in the fall, partly because I had promised my old colleague Everett I would come, and partly because I wanted to show her the light there, which is different from the light in Rio, but similarly extraordinary. New York in November, where James met her and was careful in his reaction in the way that he has always been careful, processing things privately and presenting you with the considered version. Afterward, in the hotel bar while Gabriela slept, James said, "Dad, I can see that you're happy." I said I am. He said, "I also know you, and I know you know what this is." I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." He took a drink. "And is the happy worth the knowing?" I said, "For now, yes." He nodded. He didn't argue with that, and I respected him for it. He was asking the right question, and I had given him the honest answer, which is that I was a 67-year-old man who had found a form of happiness that had a price and an expiration date. And I had decided, with the deliberate consideration of someone who had spent 32 years weighing evidence, that the happiness was worth both. The Italy trip was in May 2024. 10 days. Rome for 4 nights, then the Amalfi Coast. A level of travel I would not have considered reasonable at any earlier point in my life, and that I arranged without hesitation because I wanted to see Rio and Gabriela's face, the quality she had of becoming more herself in beautiful places. I was right about that. She was luminous in Italy. She walked through Rome with the attention of someone absorbing a city she had thought about but not fully imagined, and the reality was exceeding the imagination, and watching that happen, watching someone encounter something they had not known they needed, was worth every dollar of the trip. We had dinner on a terrace above the Amalfi Coast on our 4th night there. The sea below us, the lights of the towns on the cliffs above, the particular southern Italian darkness. Gabriela was wearing a white dress and had her hair down and was looking at the lights on the water with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not happiness exactly, but something deeper, something like recognition, like the world had produced something that matched something inside her that she had not known was there. She looked across the table at me and said, "Thomas, I am happy right now." I said, "I know, I can see it." She said, "Thank you for bringing me here." I said, "I wanted to see this place with someone who would see it properly." She reached across the table and took my hand and held it. And I thought, whatever else this is, whatever its limits and its price and its inevitable end, this moment is true. This is a true moment. I still believe that. I have not been able to make myself stop believing it. And I have tried, in the months since she left, harder than I have tried at most things. By the fall of 2024, the drift had begun. I noticed it the way you notice a change in pressure, not dramatically, not with any single event you could point to, but as an accumulation of small differences in the atmosphere. She was more often on her phone in the evenings. She had plans with friends more frequently. The mornings, which had been the best part, coffee on the balcony, the southwest light, the particular comfortable silence of 2 people who have no particular need to perform for each other. The mornings had a different quality. Not cold, not unfriendly, just different. The difference between a fire that is burning and a fire that is settling. I was 68 years old. I was a former federal judge who had spent 32 years reading people in a courtroom. I knew exactly what the difference meant. My response was to spend more. I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware that it is, from a rational perspective, a clearly futile strategy, that no amount of money can extend the life of something that has decided to end. I am also aware that I knew this at the time. And I spent more anyway. The jewelry purchase was in October 2024, a piece she had mentioned once in passing in front of a shop window in Leblon, a comment so brief I might have missed it, and that I had written down mentally with the precision of a man who has spent his career paying attention to what people say in passing, because what people say in passing is usually what they actually mean. I went back the next morning and bought it. Left it on the kitchen table with a note with only her name on it. She came into the kitchen and saw it and was very still for a long moment. Then she picked it up and looked at it and looked at me and said, "Thomas." I said, "You mentioned it." She put it on. She wore it every day for the 4 months she had left in the apartment. I watched it on her wrist every morning on the balcony, and I thought, this is what I have. This morning, this light, this wrist. This will have to be enough. It was enough. Until it wasn't. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in February 2025 and asked to come over that evening. I said, of course. I made coffee. I sat on the cream sofa, the large cream-colored sofa that she had chosen on a Sunday afternoon in a furniture store in Barra, that she had spent 40 minutes considering with the specific focus she brought to decisions that mattered to her. And I waited. She came at 7. She sat beside me on the sofa, not across from me. She took my hand. She said, "Thomas, I need to be honest with you about some things." I said, "I know." She said she was 31. She said she had been happy. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. She said it in the specific, careful way of someone who is telling the truth about something difficult, not the way of someone constructing a story to soften a blow. She was telling the truth. She had been happy. And she also needed a future that I could not build for her. A future that looked like a future at 31, and not like a beautiful, expensive, temporary life with a 68-year-old man on a balcony in Ipanema. She said she had met someone her own age. Not romantically, she said. She was careful about this. But his existence had made her understand something she had been avoiding understanding, about what she needed from the next decade of her life, about the difference between happiness in a moment and happiness in a direction. I thought of something Margaret had said once about a case she was working on. She was talking about her client's choices, not mine, but she said it in the way she said things when she meant them to have broader application. She said, "Some people choose the life that's available to them and call it the life they wanted. There's nothing wrong with that. But eventually the available life ends, and they have to figure out who they were underneath it." She came back the following Saturday with 2 friends to collect her things. They were quick and careful. They took the plants from the balcony, her plants, that she had grown from cuttings and named and tended every morning with the kind of attention that plants require, and that I had come to rely on seeing, the ritual of it, the evidence that something in the apartment was being cared for. They took the framed photograph of her mother. They took the cream sofa. The building manager brought up a smaller couch 2 days later. Darker, narrower, functional. I sat on it and looked at the wall where the cream sofa had been and thought about the 40 minutes she had spent choosing it. That focus was real. I keep returning to that. Whatever else I have had to revise in my understanding of those 2 years, I have not been able to revise that. She chose that sofa with care. She was present in those 40 minutes. She was, in whatever way was available to her, genuine. Let me tell you what $390,000 looks like when you count it. $62,000 in rent upgrades over 2 years. The 7th floor costs more than the 3rd floor, and the view costs more than no view, and I chose both without hesitation, which I do not regret. $41,000 in travel. The trips I have described, and several smaller ones I haven't. $38,000 in what I can only call family maintenance. Her mother's medical bills, the rent for the apartment in Belo Horizonte, the brother's university fees for 1 semester when things were difficult, $12,000 in the kind of gifts that don't announce themselves as gifts. Things I noticed she wanted and acquired without being asked, because I had spent 32 years paying attention to what people wanted, and it had become, by then, a reflex I did not know how to turn off. The Italy trip was $22,000. The jewelry was $8,000. The rest was the texture of a life, dinners, taxis, the upgrade to a better phone when hers broke, the weekend in Buzios, the 112 other things that are too small to remember individually, but that add up in the way that things add up when you have decided not to count them. I have $162,000 left. I have my pension from the government and my Social Security, which together come to approximately $3,400 a month. I am not in danger. I am not destitute. I am a 69-year-old man in an apartment in Ipanema with a view of the ocean and a smaller couch than I had before, and a study with 2 photographs on the wall. Margaret's Copacabana postcard, and the empty rectangle where Gabriela's mother used to be. James has asked me twice whether I am coming home. I have told him twice that I am not sure Rio is where home is, but that I am also not sure Atlanta is where home is, and that the question of where home is has been, for the past 3 years, more complicated than the word usually implies. He accepts this with the same careful patience he accepted everything, privately, completely, without the translation of acceptance into approval that some children require. Claire calls every Sunday. She does not ask about money or about coming home. She asks about my week, about the bakery, about whether I am sleeping, about whether I have friends in the city. She asked me once, several months after Gabriela left, whether I regretted moving to Rio. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I said, "Your mother had that photograph on her wall for 31 years. I went there for her. And then I stayed for reasons that cost me more than I anticipated and gave me less than I needed. But I saw the thing she looked at. I stood on that sidewalk and saw those mountains. I don't think I regret that." There was a pause. Then Claire said, "I think that's enough, Dad. I think she's right. I have spent my career determining what is sufficient evidence, what is sufficient cause, what a person's actions are sufficient to warrant. I am now, in a different context, making the same determination about my own life. I am 69 years old. I am in Ipanema. The southwest light still comes through the balcony doors in the late afternoon and does what it does. Gilberto still nods at me in the lobby with the proprietary care of someone who has decided I am his responsibility. The bakery still has the best bread I have encountered in 4 years of looking. The city doesn't know what happened up here on the 7th floor. It doesn't know about the cream sofa or the photograph or the 40 minutes it took to choose it. It continues at its own scale and its own pace, indifferent in the way that all cities are indifferent, and that Rio is indifferent with a particular beauty that makes the indifference easier to bear. I'm staying, not because I have nowhere else to go, though that is partially true, not because it is the life I planned, because it is not, but because when I stand on this balcony in the late afternoon, and the light does what it does, and the ocean is where it always is, and the mountains are the mountains that my wife looked at for 31 years from a study wall in Atlanta, I feel, in those moments, close to something. I don't have a better word for it than that. Close to something. For a man who spent 2 years trying to hold on to something that was never entirely his, close to something will have to do. It's enough. For now, it's enough.